Uh, Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. We are doing today's Comprehensivist Wednesdays that we do in collaboration with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. And today it's an honor to have Mike back. And he's going to be talking about a subject that he knows a lot about. And I have to tell you, just to give you a little bit of example, there was 1 year of my life when I was into chess. And I was so much into chess that I was able to dream whole games. And I would wake up from my nightmare saying, no, don't do that. So I have some familiarity with chess, but it's been a really long time. So I'm very, very excited about this meetup. Mike, what are we doing?
Well, I made a pretty bold claim in the intro video that I made for everyone that I kind of said that chess was the perfect polymathic teaching tool. And it is a big claim because first you have to admit that you have some sense of polymathy yourself, and then make the statement that if you play chess or teach it to a young person, say somebody starting in second grade, and you have this second grader not only play the game, but play competitively and study and really take in all the different life lessons and ideas that come from playing and reviewing your games. At the end of that road, at the end of that line, I'm making the claim that you're going to have a kid that thinks polymathically and can think critically. I'm hoping to give some examples to open up this meetup with an improvisational chat with Shrikant about what we'll be doing the rest of the night. And then later on, I'm going to be actually showing one of the most famous chess games ever played, hoping that there are several beginners here, people that know absolutely nothing about chess. The key idea is, can we agree, even if we know nothing about chess? Yes, I see music here. Yes, I see what an actor might do, what a mathematician might do, what a linguist might do, taking in this information. And then at the end, say, we're onto something. Chess is indeed a polymathic teaching tool. Are there others? Or maybe you can say to me, not a chance, it doesn't fly. So Shrikant, we'll see.
All right. So folks, this is going to be a lot of fun. Okay, so we're going to start by just a conversation here, and then we will get into chess. So Mike, that's a tall claim, but I'm not able to evaluate it because the thing is that I don't know what it means when you're talking about teaching chess. What is involved in teaching chess? What happens during that process? Tell us a little bit more.
It is a fascinating day of your life when you walk into a classroom expecting there to be high school kids on the receiving end of your instruction. I was not a teacher. I learned how to play chess seriously on the floor of the American Stock Exchange, where I haphazardly fell into chess, made a wrong number call looking to play in a local tournament, ended up getting involved with a company that taught chess here in I live in New York, in White Plains, New York. I show up at a school and there's somebody at the front named Jim wearing looked just like Eric Clapton when Clapton was playing with Cream. He had long hair, smoking a cigarette. He goes, Mike Amori? I go, yeah. He goes, come on. And we walk into the room and I can tell right away by the artwork on the wall, this ain't high school. It's a K1 school. And he begins to teach these little kids who are sitting on their bottoms chess. I knew how to play. I had an interest in maybe teaching, but it was very small. And he shows the game and I turn around and these kids are mesmerized. They're absolutely mesmerized, wide-eyed. We finished the class. He goes, what'd you think? I go, that was amazing. He goes, okay, you do it. What? You do it. So next thing I know, we moved down to from 1A to 1B and I have a group of first graders in front of me. Instantly fell in love with the process. Instantly. Love it at first sight. There is nothing in the world like a wide-eyed first grader. Nothing. I learned to animate the pieces. You know, we're virtual, but if I had a demo board, there'd be a big board in front that I could stand in front of you and hold the piece for a first grader, for a second grader. Bring the pieces to life by making them talk. What would the queen say, for example, the most powerful piece in chess? What would she be saying in a position where she can't move? What would you say to a first grader when you give them the choice? Do you bring the queen out and put her to work, or do you keep her back so that she can't move, but nobody can take her? What happened to me is I started to get inside the personalities of these kids. Well, it was easy for me because that's about where my mentality topped out. But I started to be able to read, what are these kids like? Where are the risk takers? Where are the wise guys? Who's shy? Who doesn't want to talk? Who doesn't want to make a mistake? Who could care less how many games they lost? So that initial day led me to eventually teaching chess in the curriculum in a gifted and talented program in White Plains, which was a joy beyond words, because what they were doing, they were taking these kids out of the classroom who were primed to think out of the box. So for me, now there was no curriculum, there was no chess curriculum, it was all improvisation. So what I would do is go into the gifted and talented program and the teacher would say, we're doing a study about archaeology. Okay, I don't know anything about archaeology until I stop and I realize chess positions have structure. If you look at how the pawns are arranged, they look exactly like a dinosaur skeleton, which all the kids could relate to. You take one of those pawns off the board, you make a hole. You take two pawns off the board, you make two holes. All of a sudden, not only was I giving a demonstration about archaeology, I'm talking about architecture now. Because if that hole that you made allowed other pieces to come in, the same way water can come in if you have a hole in your roof. Now I'm thinking about contracting. I don't know anything about contracting, right? So you see where this is going. And then music, it doesn't end chess. I see the chessboard, I see the piano. You should all be able to do that in your heads. The chessboard is composed of 64 squares, not keys, but they're black and white. So is the piano. If you look at sheet music, what an amazing meetup we had last week when David did this presentation about that Mozart piece. It was phenomenal. He had us actually reading sheet music, and a lot of us had no idea what that was about. But when a chess player looks at a diagram of a chess position, it's exactly what we see, figurines. So that's kind of the long, short answer. Shrikant, I obviously could go on, but I want to converse.
Let me give you my own answer to that. Though I don't know much about chess, I mean, I learned it on my own just by trying it and playing and reading all kinds of books and playing with so many people. So I never really got into a chess education. But the thing I remember, the thing that comes to my mind is the movie, one of my favorite movies, Searching for Bobby Fischer. And that is an epistemological movie. Yes. It is about your ways of thinking and your way in which you manage your thoughts. It is about the trade-off between being improvisational and having rigorous preparation. What is the relationship between them? How do you have preparation at the same time maintain the fluidity of your action, the initiative, the creativity of your thought? How do you keep on raising the level of rigorousness where you can bring in a lot more into your repertoire, at the same time remain open to seeing new possibilities that you have never seen before?
Correct.
Both. How do you do both of them? Typically what happens is that when people focus on one, it kills the other. They try to prepare in a way which stops their creativity. They try to be creative in a way which stops them from organizing all their observations so that they can take their lessons to the next level. How do you bring both of them together? And that is what that movie is about. So I was stunned the first time I saw it. I'm saying, this is philosophy, this is epistemology. And that is what he's talking about. So that's the example that comes to my mind.
Correct. And you were also a big fan of the book, The Art of Learning, which is about Wade Skin's own teaching technique and learning technique rather. And the movie is about weight skin.
Absolutely. And that's another example of that supports your point, that weight skin takes everything that he has learned from chess, takes what he has learned from martial arts, which people say, oh, these are completely different things. No. And talks about art of learning, what is art of learning? That is epistemology. That is a general method of operation. So the entire book of art of learning is a support, is along the same directions that you're going.
Correct. That's right. And you know, the beauty of getting the kids comfortable enough to compete is they learn very quickly the result or the consequence of an action in real time. So you can make a decision and maybe not get feedback for a couple of weeks later, depending on what decision you're making. But in a chess game, you're playing with one of these, with a clock, and your time is limited, and you make the decision, but you find out in a hurry when you've made a mistake. And then you have to balance time with speed. You know, again, very Taoist, right? You need to balance too much speed, you lose depth.
I was about to say, Mike, that, you know, when we talked about how you interact with parents, but then I just remembered that I did not talk to you about that. I just watched your video. By the way, I love the preview videos that you're doing because they're doing a very good job of setting. But that point that you make in the video, that your clients are not just the students, they're parents too.
Yeah.
And by leveraging, by connecting what you're doing to their own professions, they see it in their own way, and they're able to transmit it to their own kids. So you're seeing people who are architects, people who are mathematicians, people who are finance people, people who are artists, all of them connecting what you are saying with their own fields.
Correct, which helped eliminate the imposter syndrome that a lot of us face when you're in a circle and you feel kind of outgunned intellectually or physically. It depends wherever you are. And that used to happen a lot to me. But then I realized I don't need to lead the conversation. I just need to be part of the conversation.
Mike, I have a better solution to that. I actually look for context like that. I love it when people know everybody else knows a lot more. That's why I'm doing meetups like the one on Gospel of John, where I am the person who knows the least. Because I think that's the place in which you can learn the most. In that sense, another way of thinking about it is that being in contact with people who are very diverse group of people who have expertise in many different fields, and you can pick up a certain just attitude towards them. And that's the heart of comprehensivism, by being open to people from different perspectives, from with different skills, and picking a little bit. One of my favorite thinkers is Charlie Munger, who is who's a partner of Warren Buffett, and Warren Buffett calls him, he's the brain guy. And he's actually right. Warren Buffett is incredibly good, but Charlie Munger, he has this concept of a tool belt. He says, I look at every field to find out what general purpose tools I can pick up from it and add to my tool belt. So look at thermodynamics and say, okay, what can I get from this that is useful everywhere? So this comprehensivist belt. And looks like what you've done is that you looked at chess and tried to develop a comprehensivist tool belt from chess itself.
Right. And I have to be honest, though, at the beginning, I had mentioned this in another presentation I did, there is a sprinkling of laziness to this. And that's where the improvisation comes in, because the chess curriculum hadn't been written yet. I worked for a guy named Sunil Weeramantry, who's very famous in the chess world. His son is a world-class player, but Sunil really started most of the in-class education here on the East Coast. He was one of the pioneers, but there was no written curriculum. So we pretty much went in, and the problem was nobody in the schools played chess. I mean, occasionally you'd get a teacher who played, but for the most part, we were given free rein. But when we started to having to attach it to the curriculum and then going in front of a board of education, that's when I mentioned in that intro video about what is your definition of critical thinking. I had that sprung on me once at a board meeting, and I had memorized, all the you should Google critical thinking. You'd have 10 educators in a room. Nobody's coming to a consensus. What the hell does that mean? And I actually stood in front of a board once, turned beet red, and I was just regurgitating these words that I had heard. And then it completely switched. When they would ask me, why are you coming to us? I go, here are some of the words that I'm using in these conversations. I was speaking to Joe tonight about the word convergence. Mm-hmm. At what grade level do you think a kid or a student should get a handle on the word convergence? And how do you define it? In chess, it's very easy. You have two pieces that are starting from different points that are pointing at the same square. They're converging. If I put that into words, a second grader is going to look at me like, what are you doing? But if I show that two pieces are pointing at the same square, and if one of them gets there, you lose. Take it further. If they experience this in a tournament game, a piece lands in front of their king and they don't realize there's another piece protecting it. That's because a moment ago there was convergence that the student didn't pick up. I'll tell you what, in 4 or 5 years, when that kid starts seeing convergence on a math graph, they're going to have a nice conversation with the teacher. That was the kind of stuff I was presenting to the boards at that point because it was real, it was tactile.
One thing that comes to my mind, this is going to keep happening, Mike, because this is just so rich material. One of the things that chess seems to be really good at is to use our visual cortex. Our visual cortex is very large, and being able to see relationships visually, as opposed to through a letter, through a sequence, a word that you're reading, our visual cortex is able to see multiple connections. And like, for example, in chess, you are actually running those patterns over time. You're projecting what is going to happen. And we can do it. Our visual cortex is quite capable of handling.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah. Handling that.
So you're going to meet Rusa one day. Unfortunately, I know some of you had saw that a great friend and a colleague, an international master. And just a quick story which connects to the visualization in chess. I had played a local master here. This is probably going back 15 years. So I played at the expert level, and I'm hanging on to that rating by a thread. So I can play. I'm not a beginner. I can obviously play, but a title player like an international master, it's a different world. And I played this master, and I had the black pieces, which means I went second. All the chess players here know I'm fighting to equalize the game. And then suddenly I'm better. And in chess, what happens sometimes is you get a position on the board that you feel, it's intuitive. You know there's something there. Computer will find it instantly. But I'm human, and I couldn't quite feel the move. I couldn't find the move. And there's another dynamic. If I play the line that I played, the game would end in a draw. He cannot stop me from forcing a draw, which means I would make a tie with a higher rated player. So now I have a dilemma. If I push and I keep looking for the right move and I play it and it's not really there, I lose the game. Or I spend too much time thinking and I lose on time. Or I think for a bit, play a move, he agrees to a draw, we shake hands and go home. I did that. I went home. I put the position on a computer. I have technology on my phone that will beat most grandmasters in the world. That's how good the computers play chess in these days. But I put that very position on my computer, and this is a while ago. The computers were still very strong. And the computer instantly finds this move, Rook C2. And if I put the rook on that square, it's a temporary sacrifice of a whole rook. But with a forced sequence of moves, my opponent cannot stop me from steering the game into a technically winning position. I'm like, darn it, I had a win and I missed it. Very common. The next day, I'm on the phone with Rusa in the car, driving to a school class. We were teaching together. She's driving. How was your game with Lonnie last night? I made a draw. Oh, that's good. He's a master. That's a good result. I go, no, it's not. I missed a win. She goes, what do you mean? I go, I had a win. She goes, tell me the position. I go, what? Tell me the position. She's driving. We have headsets and we're driving. I have the kind of memory, it's very strange. I can't pull the position out of my head, but if I played the game within the last month, I can tell you the game from the beginning. I was black, so e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, take, e5, and I get to the move and I go, this is the position. Rusa pauses for about 8 seconds and goes, do you have rook c2 here? What? She found the move driving a car blindfold. She's just hearing the moves and she finds the move that I could not find over the board. How's that for visualization?
Wow. Wow. Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing.
You get a kick out of her when you meet her. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah. All right. So are we ready? So firstly, let's ask, shall we ask people about their level of expertise? What options do you want to give them?
Let's if you are a complete beginner or somebody who doesn't know any of the moves at all, you can just type in chat the letter A. If you know the rules of chess and you have a basic understanding of how the game is played, you can type a B. If you play online frequently, perhaps you've played a live tournament or you've played serious games with your friends, you can type C. And if you are a competitive rated chess player, you can type D. And I'm hoping for a whole bunch of A's. Complete beginners to chess.
Okay, we got lots of B's and A's and a couple of C's.
Great.
All right. Okay.
So let me share this screen. All righty. Do you see a chessboard, Shrikant?
Yep.
All righty. I have to move some things around. Let me just text something out. Perfect. Okay. If you can see the chessboard, what I'm going to do is twofold. I'm eventually going to show you one of the most famous games ever played, ever taught. And it was an offhanded game. It was a game that wasn't meant to be played, yet it was. It was played in 1858. But before I do that, I want you to envision that I'm walking into a 4th grade classroom. And I'm going to change the grades depending on what I'm showing you. And if I was walking into a 4th grade classroom, I'm on their turf. I know there are educators here, and if there are some grade school educators, you know what I'm talking about. You walk into a 4th grade classroom, that teacher has everything down to a science. And I spent 10 years in Catholic school, so I know what it's like walking into a classroom that the teacher wants it to be orderly. You walk in the room and instantly, with enough experience, you can see who's a little taken aback by why I'm there, because I'm holding the demo board. So you're looking at the chessboard virtually, but imagine me holding a big demo board here. And I always have it set up before I walk in the room. The reason for that is because it's a novelty. And I want the kids to see that there's something new coming into the classroom. And then I will set it up, and then I'll turn around. I'll probably ask somebody in the front who might appear shy to me, can I borrow your desk so that I can put, I was a drummer as a kid, so I use a cymbal stand to hang my demo board. So the kid gives me the desk, I set it up, and this is what they say. And I pause. At the beginning, when I was first teaching, I couldn't pause at all because dead air time is the worst when you're not comfortable. You feel like you constantly have to say something. The more comfortable I got, I just hung the board. And if they were beginners, all the better. And I would begin to talk about what I see when I look at the chessboard. None of it had to do with chess at the beginning. Let's work on some visualization. Take the chessboard and turn it 45 degrees and try to make a baseball diamond in your mind. Or just tip it. And all of a sudden you see a diamond shape. I could spend a lot of time talking about baseball. Do you all see the piano here? Or at least my reference to the light and dark keys? They all make different sounds. Well, on the chessboard, they all have different roles. I would have 4 stars on the chessboard, and I would initially put them on these 4 squares. Shrikant, is the green circle showing up?
Yep.
Great. If you play Monopoly, I think I read some people here are real board gamers, which is terrific. If you really know how to play Monopoly, you start to know where the prime spots are. Everybody wants Boardwalk and Park Place at the beginning, but then when you start learning through computer simulation where you land the most, like if you land in jail or just visiting, and you roll the dice from jail or just visiting, 6, 7, and 8 are the most common numbers on the dice. Well, 2 of them land on those brown properties before pre-parking. Little game theory. In chess, those 4 squares, you're going to have the fight of your life over, because anything that is centralized on the chessboard has scope, a word that I teach when I'm in the curriculum. The word scope, I easily can say to a group of 4th graders, where have you heard the word scope? You know, I might make a joke, not the mouthwash, depending on the grade. You might get a laugh, you might not. Usually the teachers, which is a lot of fun when you send the joke over the class's head that only the teachers get, but whatever. So you send it out, scope. Well, I've heard microscope, telescope, periscope. Well, what do those words have in common? Very basically, it's how much can you see? What can you access from where you are? Those 4 squares make pretty much every piece that you're looking at more powerful. Here's the problem. We're playing in a closed system. There are 64 squares that we can use. You have 16 pieces, I have 16 pieces. They're not all going to fit on those 4 squares. And I'll show you as we introduce the pieces individually why those 4 squares are so, so important. Teach that to a 4th grader and have them eventually start to compete in a chess game. And what happens? They have purpose from move 1. They have purpose. You teach them what checkmate is. So even the beginners here would know checkmate ends the game. It's when the king is trapped. But checkmate is the end of the game. Long before you get to checkmate, you need purpose. And the purpose is to do your best to control these squares and get the most powerful pieces on the back out. Now, we're going to talk about 2 types of value. One is nominal and the other is relative. Nominal value can be used in different ways in English. As it's applied to the chessboard is very simple. The value of a piece, all things being equal, our poor friend the pawn. You've been a pawn in a chess game. That's the great way to use the word. The pawn has the value of 1. Think of it as being able to lift 1 pound. The beautiful thing about a pawn, however, if it ever does make it to the end of the board, it can promote to the most powerful piece or another, but usually it can go from the lowest value to the queen. The next value are these 2. The knight and the bishop. In our parlance, they're called minor pieces. They're worth 3 pawns. 3 pawns. So you can technically say, if you trade this bishop for 3 of black's pawns, you've made a fair trade. The rook in the corner is worth 5. So they're all odd numbers. The most powerful piece, as I've already mentioned, is the queen. Numerically, 9 points of relative value. She is an absolute beast. I have no other way to define that piece. She is a workhorse, the best attacker in the game, and your most important attacker. 9. Obviously, the pieces on the left are symmetrical. So just as a review, knights and bishops are 3. The rook is 5. They're all odd numbers. The pawns are 1. And yeah, that's everybody except the king. The king has, through computer simulation, they say the king can handle his own about the same as a bishop. The king actually can do some work, but there's a problem with the king. He's vulnerable. The king is not allowed to be captured. It's the only piece in the game that you cannot take. He has to be trapped. And because he falls under this rule that checkmate ends the game, if a piece is attacking your king and you have no way to defend that attack, you give up the game and you lose. So because he can't be captured, they don't give him nominal value. Now, why do we give the pieces value? So that when you're teaching young people, they know what a fair trade is. They know if I trade a bishop for a knight, Mr. A said that's a fair trade. That's a good thing. If they catch one of my rooks, which is technically 5, and they only give up here their bishop for my rook, they've gained 2 points. They took 5 from me. They only gave away 3. Their hands will go up, Mr. A, look what I have. Second graders are going to show you in their hand the minute they catch something. Now we go to the much more important concept, relative value. Relative value is what the piece is doing now. Right now, in the position that you're looking at, and this is really for all, hopefully there's a lot of beginners here. There are only 2 types of pieces that can move. The pawns, and if I left click the pawn, the computer is set to show you the legal moves. That pawn has 2 options in this position. I am clicking the bishop, but you'll notice there are no legal moves because you'll learn in a moment the bishop moves diagonally. And right now, the bishop is restricted by his own pawns. Now, here's where the cool concept comes in. In this position, this knight can move. Think of it as a show horse that can jump over a fence. This knight can actually, you see I clicked it, move to those 2 squares by going 2 vertical and 1 horizontal. So I could make the argument that right now, that knight is worth more to me than my queen. My queen cannot move. And you're going to learn that she can move in any straight line, horizontal, vertical, diagonal. But in this current position, neither queen can move. So what we start to introduce, and of course with adults as well, is the idea that just because you have more points than I do does not mean your position is better. What is worth more, a bicycle or a car? Not enough information. I had talked to Joe about what is a better weapon right out of the art of war, a sword or a net? Not enough information. I know which one might cost more. I know which one would do this if it does that, but you need to show me the position. What happened to me is, and now I'll go a little bit into some of the ideas that somebody like Piaget might say, that there are stages of learning, and that the younger the learning, normally the more concrete. You play enough chess and you start to learn that I can give away points, but have a better position. So mathematically, it doesn't add up, but on the chessboard, it does. The moment you teach that to a young kid where they realize there's play within the numbers are not concrete like they are on a math test. They're flexible. You start to work on their intuition. It really gets fascinating. Here's the first piece we're going to learn. And this is the first piece that I would teach the kids. And I'm going to go very quickly through the learning phase. This is a rook. It moves vertically and horizontally. It cannot jump. The only piece that can jump is the knight, the horse. It can go vertically and horizontally. That's it. That's it. Nothing more to teach you. The black rook can do the same, obviously. If I'm playing white and I put my rook here, I've just made a mistake, which is the greatest thing in the world when it happens to a second grader and they realize they put the rook on e3, they're going to lose the rook. It's black's turn. You are not allowed to break a straight line. So if you put your rook there, I'm going to take you. Thank you for the free rook. So of course I have to be gentle, and I don't want the kids to be like crushed when they lose a game when they're very young, but I'm also not going to coddle them. When they come up to me as many second graders have, and go, Mr. A, it's not fair. I go, what's the matter, Molly? Kevin took my rook. Yeah. Show me what happened. Well, my rook was up here and I wanted to move it to E3 because I have a sister who's 3 and her name is Evelyn. It begins with E. So I wanted to put the rook on E3 and he took it. It's not fair. I've heard that constantly. Now, how cute is that? I'm not making this up. This is not well, I guess I am a little, but it happens all the time. But what I tell her is very politely, hey, Molly, next time, don't put the rook there. That's what my mother would tell me. What'd you put the rook there for? They learn that very quickly. Let's go to number 2. The bishop. The bishop, the 3-point bishop, a minor piece. Very simple. If I'm teaching this to a group, I have a yardstick in my hand. It's vertical. Then I turn it this way, it's horizontal, and then I make a little noise and I bend it, and you start to teach them that diagonal lines are still straight. That's it. Think nothing but diagonal. You cannot break a straight line. You'll have 2 bishops when you play. One will be on a light square, one will be on a dark square. If it's white's turn, this bishop can traverse this diagonal. It can also do the same here. You can go as far as you want, but if you choose to play a move like that, you just gave your bishop away. That's it. If I centralize this white bishop, let me just make a couple of random moves. You see how both of these 2 bishops are sitting on those sweet squares that I talked to you about earlier? In this current position, both of those bishops can go to 13 squares. 13 if they occupy the center of the board and the board is open. 13. I won't count them. If I put a bishop in the corner, same piece. A moment ago, it had 13. And if you spend the time counting, you should come up with the number 7. Its scope has just been cut nearly in half. One move. If you choose to put your bishop on H8, you need to have a good reason. Because if you put a piece on the side of the board without a good reason, you're limiting its scope. Keep that in mind for when we start the game. That's the bishop. And if there was more time for questions from the group, but I'm just make it simple as possible. It can only move on the diagonals without turning. Now we have the queen. I left the bishop here for a reason. The queen is the rook and the bishop combined. She moves vertically, horizontally, and diagonally. Put her on one of the middle squares. The rook, by the way, the one that moves vertically and horizontally, is a cool piece. If you pretend this is a rook, because the board is 8 by 8, there's always 7 empty squares on the either side of the rook, no matter where you put it. So the rook can always go to 14 squares if the board's open. Well, the queen is a rook. She moves vertically and horizontally, but she's also a bishop, meaning from one of these central squares, 27 squares of scope. An enormously powerful piece. I don't have any other words to describe the power of the queen. If we go to the king moves exactly the same way as the queen. One big difference. He can only move 1 square at a time, which I've used the word, or essentially the king can only move to adjacent squares. I've taught the word adjacent as young as 1st grade. I never got it through in kindergarten, but I went as young as 1st grade to teach the concept of what it means for things to be adjacent. It's really next to. The black king, if I move, I don't know whose turn it is, okay? If I put the black king in the corner, that king has 3 squares of scope. Those 3 squares, because he can move diagonally, vertically, and horizontally, that king can reach any one of those 3 squares. If I move the king 1 spot off the corner, he's now up to 5. And naturally, if you're off the board, 8 squares of power. Keep in mind, the king can never be captured. Now we're going to talk about check and checkmate, and we're almost ready to look at the game. Check is a very simple concept. It means that one of your pieces is pointing at my king. Because we know the rook moves vertically and horizontally, the language of chess says that the rook on G7, I'm naming the square specifically, G7, is attacking the black king on D7 because the black king is in the path of the rook. You cannot leave your king under attack. You must stop the attack. And there's 3 ways to do it. In this position, you can do all 3. The simplest way is to move your king to a safe square. I'm going to try to move the king to D6 and let go of the mouse. And you'll know, well, and this, I'm sorry, with this program, it's letting me do that move, but that's technically illegal. I'm not allowed to put the king here because if I move my king to that square, yeah, I did get away from this rook, but I stepped into the path of the other rook. That's illegal. I did not get my king out of danger if I put him here, but I could move him up. I could move him up. As a matter of fact, I could move the king to any one of these 3 squares. There's a much better move for me here. Who is the piece that's bothering me? It's the rook on G7. Can I take the rook? The queen moves diagonally. Just take the rook. Now, not only am I out of check, but I took a rook from you, and with the language, I am attacking the other rook. Back it up. There is a 3rd way to get out of check. Learn from the martial arts. Block whatever it is that is attacking your king. In this position, I technically could put my queen here, and my queen is absorbing the power of the rook. My king has been shielded. Now, if you think of it logically, what is the best move for black? Clearly, take the enemy rook. But a kindergartner or first grader is not going to be in such a rush. Some of them might want to just move their king regardless. But that is the basic concept of check and checkmate. If your king is being attacked, you must get out of check. The worst move on the board for black would be to come here. And if they did, the white rook would come to H8 and point at the king. And in this particular position, there is no escape for the king. He is under attack by the rook. The black queen cannot jump. She cannot jump over this rook to take the piece that's bothering her king. That's illegal. And she's not in position to block the check. This game is over. Checkmate. I mentioned earlier that the pieces, the squares have names. That is the very first thing that I do with the students when it's time to talk. And I noticed that Jeff does this in his meetups. As a teacher, your students have to hear their own voices in the classroom. The younger, the more important that is. So as I begin to know who the students are, I get them to just label the squares. Tell me where B4 is. Tell me where C6 is. Take your time. Tell me the names of the corners. And then as you get more advanced, tell me blindfold. I'll take the demo board and I'll turn it around so they can't see the squares. And then I'll ask them, take me from A1 to H8 diagonally in your head. A1, B2, C3, D4, E5. For me, it's easy. It's like playing the piano without looking if I'm a piano player. But for a kindergartner, first grade, second grade, not to see the squares, but to pick up the pattern of how the letters get larger with the numbers, or going reverse, going from A8 down to H1. It's a lot of fun. And we're getting very close to the game. Another phase of teaching is this, where what position I'm, okay. So this is not any part of tonight's game. This is a game that I analyzed about two and a half hours ago with a student who played in a real tournament game. I want you to listen to my voice. I don't want you to try to follow the moves unless you're a Again, if you're one of the C or D players, then you're going to pick up a lot of what I say. But if you're new to chess, don't try to follow what I'm saying. Listen to my words and think like a linguist. Think like someone who is utilizing language in a way that's foreign to your everyday conversation. These are some of the things that we talked about. Look at this position and think of it as a painting hanging in a museum or an X-ray. An X-ray is set. It does not change. At least the old-fashioned one different. They were printed out, put on the wall, and the doctors examined something static. The idea of doing this is called set position analysis. Look at the position and talk about what you see. I see an open H file, the rook putting this rook, which can move vertically, putting pressure on the H2 pawn. I see black has two bishops and a knight where white has two knights and a bishop. Look at these pawns. We talked about pawn structure, my students and I. What shape does that remind you of? Could be anything. But we had a long conversation about this position without moving a piece. Just a little bit of the language of chess. Finally, the knight. I'll do the pawns last. Remember that little creature that can jump over the fence? This is the hardest piece to teach because it's not linear. Well, it is linear, but it's two steps. A first grader taught me how to teach the knight by putting two fingers up in one. Occasionally, he would put this finger up, which was quite entertaining, but he would go 2 and 1, and that's a true story. And then when he would switch his hand, now he's got to go 1 and 2, he would do this occasionally. And I got a big kick out of it. And I said, what are you doing? I don't remember the kid's name, but he was in first grade. I go, what are you doing? He goes, Mr. A, it's 2 vertical and 1 horizontal, or it's 1 horizontal and 2 vertical. You know, it's like the kid who told the truck driver, take the air out of the tires so you can get out from the bridge. Same thing. That's how the knight moves. It makes the letter L, but it goes 2 steps vertically, 1 step horizontal. And it can just jump over anything in its path. It can go 2 steps horizontal, 1 step vertical. So in this position that you're looking at, this knight in the corner can land here and here. 2 squares from the corner. You notice where the black knight is. One of those sweet 4 squares that we talked about at the very beginning. The idea of centralization. In sports, why is the shortstop in baseball normally the most athletic and the center fielder? Why do certain athletes in certain positions have roles to play? Why do gymnasts start tumbling routines here where this knight is and not start their routine there? Simple. They don't have speed and they don't have space. If you understand tumbling, you understand centralization. If you understand tumbling, you should be able to have a conversation with someone who knows about how to be a choreographer. I have. I've never done anything on stage like that, but I can talk about managing space. Watch this. Those are the 8 squares that knight can control. If I'm playing the white pieces and I put anything on one of those lit up squares, this knight can take it by just going there. That's it. 2 vertical, 1 horizontal. 2 horizontal, 1 vertical. You start talking about multiplication. The knight in the center is 4 times as powerful as the knight in the corner. That's the best visual I can give you about centralization. Now to the game. We okay for time, Shrikant?
Yep.
Perfect. I didn't talk about the pawns, and I didn't talk about one more move. And it's called castling. If you recall, the most important piece in the game is the king, because if he's trapped, he's lost. You're allowed once in the game to move your king 2 squares in the direction of a rook, and the rook actually jumps right over the king's head. It's called castling. And you castle the king in order to protect him. Can you see that he's hidden, tucked in behind these 3 pawns that are on the flank of the board? It's very hard for you to attack my king if he's on the flank, because you can only attack him from one side of the board. If for whatever reason I walk my king out into the middle, he can be attacked from all directions. So you start to learn about how hockey goalies cut the crease in their net, how soccer goalies create and cut space when they're stopping an attack. Same exact concept. Finally, the pawns. These are the hardest pieces to learn because they have a lot of different tricky aspects to them. They basically can move 1 or 2 spaces straight. And once they move, they can never go backwards. Beginners move the pawns because they think it's the safest piece to move, but the pawns create the structure. And if you create a structure that you don't like, you cannot turn back. Pawns are the only piece that cannot go backwards. They capture differently than they take. They're the only piece that has this rule. In the game we're looking at, it was played between Paul Morphy and 2 characters. One was Count Isiard and the other was the Duke of Brunswick, German nobility, played in Paris, France, 1858. Paul Morphy was a genius. If there was a world championship at the time, Morphy would have been world champion. Had a photographic memory, had lawyers in the family, memorized 600 or 700 pages of Louisiana code, was a huge music enthusiast. His mother was a pianist. He would go to concerts, he'd go to the opera and come back memorizing and humming all the music. Incredible memory. Met these 2 fellas and played a game during an opera. There's some debate whether it was the Barber of Seville or Norma, there could be a third involved, and they coerced him into playing a game. The Duke and Count Isiard could play chess. They were not beginners at all, and they convinced him to play. They made so much noise during the game, the 2, because they were consulting each other against Morphy, that not only did the audience get pissed, but the actors on the stage looked up at one point and asked them to lower their voices. Legend has it there was even a lawsuit because of this disruption. Morphy's playing the white pieces and begins the game with the move e4, putting a pawn in the middle of the board. By doing so, if you recall, this bishop moves diagonally, and right now it cannot move. The second you put the pawn in the middle, you activate the bishop. What they learn very young is the essence of efficiency. I get to move 1 piece. Get the most for your money. What else did I accomplish? Because these pawns capture diagonally, the 1 single pawn that I put in the middle of the board is attacking that square and that square. So if black chooses to put something there, I can take it. Who's the most powerful piece in the game? My queen. Do you see what the single move that I open my game with has done for my queen? As mentioned, black, they are not beginners, and they start with a symmetrical opening. The 2 pawns are now locked head to head. That's called a pawn wedge. If I say that to a 3rd grader, I'm going to hear like a wedgie, Mr. A. I go, yeah, like a wedgie. Those pawns cannot move. Morphy attacks the black pawn on e5. Remember I showed you that move castling to secure the king. Well, you cannot secure the king until these 2 pieces come out. So where to move them? You could go to the side of the board, but the knight doesn't have as much flexibility there because it can't go off the board. It doesn't have the same scope. To humor you, I had a 1st grader named Jamie, I won't give his last name, who is 26 years old now, was playing white. And in this position, black gave the queen away. And Jamie could have taken the queen for free, but he didn't. Instead, he developed another piece. He brought his other knight into the game. And I watched this live. I was a tournament director, but I didn't interfere. I said, Jamie, show me your game. He was writing his moves down. And I said, did you see the queen on h4 hanging? You could just take it like an apple on a tree. He goes, yeah, I saw it. Why didn't you take it? You know what he said? because you told me in class, if I put a knight on the side of the board, it loses some of its scope. That's a true story. The younger the student, the more concrete the thinking. If you tell the student, don't put the knight on the side of the board, they're not going to put the knight on the side of the board. Then you have to add in, if you have a good reason. If I can take the other person's queen, I'm going to put my knight on the side of the board. Okay. That's not what the boys in the Opera House did. They played the move d6. Because pawns capture diagonally, black is technically protecting this pawn. If you give up the 3-point knight, and remember, the points don't really matter, this pawn captures diagonally, you lost a knight for a pawn. So Morphy had absolutely no interest in doing that. Morphy was a fierce attacker, but he never attacked until he was ready. We just done a meetup on the art of war. You want to connect the art of war and military strategy to chess, you're going to have a whole meetup just on that one concept alone. You do not attack the enemy until you are ready to attack. What you want is the enemy to attack you when they are not ready to attack. You know, the old story that the battle is won or lost before it begins happens all the time in chess. Morphy plays what's known as a pawn break. He is offering the Duke a chance to trade pawns. And if the pawns disappear, let's say he takes, he might take back with his queen. Do you see how fluid the queen is from that square? She's also vulnerable, by the way, but he's already got the strongest piece he has on a dominating square. Now, she might get chased away, but he would be willing to do that. But that's not what the boys did. They brought this diagonal bishop out to g4, creating what's known as a pin. The knight on f3 is being attacked by the bishop. You should not move the knight. If you visualize the knight moving, do you see what the bishop is pointing at now? Your queen. So Morphy is never going to move this knight. Instead, he took a pawn in the middle and they took his knight, which leads to the first phase with the young ones. The adults too, but very common with the young ones. Which way to take back? You definitely want to take the bishop. You don't want to play a piece down. But there's two options here. You can take diagonally with the pawn, or you can take with the queen. This is an excellent litmus test because I asked the question open-ended to the class. How many of you want to take with the queen? First thing you see is not the answer. If they're in second grade, the first thing you see is their heads going left and right to see who else is going to raise their hand. Happens all the time. The braver students, the attacking students, will almost always take with the queen because they have an opportunity to put into motion what you told them is the most powerful piece. And that's what Morphy did. The other students will take with the pawn, thinking it's safer for their team because the queen, you've kind of limited her scope. And the queen feels more secure to them. So they're already playing defense in a position where they have an option to play offense, which is what Morphy did. Also notice that the queen is pointing at a pawn that only the black king can protect. This is the most vulnerable pawn in the game at the beginning, the F pawn. If you were animating this for a kindergartner or a first grade, you put this on as a play and you have a conversation between this pawn and the king, talking about why the pawn is so nervous. Well, I'd be nervous too. The most powerful piece in the here, I'll turn the board around, change the perspective. This is you. That's you. And you have the most powerful piece in the game pointing right at you. Little unnerving. So that's a lot of fun with the kids. So they take their pawn back and the game is equal. And now we ask them an important question. Bring out your light squared bishop. We use the word develop. Bring it out and point it at the f7 square. I wish we were live. It would be so much easier to interact and have some of the newer players guess the moves, but we'd be too short of time. But the bishop itself has 5 options. And then we start talking about candidacy. What is a candidate move? That bishop has 5 legal moves. One of them is very bad. If you move the bishop all the way up here, there are 2 black pieces that can take it. The knight, vertical, vertical, horizontal, or the pawn. You're not going to do that. You could attack the king. That's check. But that attack can easily be blocked. That's not what Morphy did. Morphy put the bishop on c4. And this is where we introduce the idea of convergence. The queen on f3 and the bishop on c4 are both pointing at the f7 square. If black ignores that and plays a random move on the side of the board, the queen will swoop down the board and take the pawn. Game is over. Checkmate. The king is directly attacked by the queen. There's no piece that can take her, and he cannot run to escape because he'll still be in check, and he cannot take her because by taking her, he's putting himself in the path of the bishop. That's illegal. Checkmate, game over. So these guys saw that. They're not beginners, and they played a very good move. They brought their knight, they brought their knight out to f6 and stopped the queen from getting to the pawn. You could take the knight, but that would not be a good move. You would lose your queen for a knight. So what Morphy did was very clever. He found an alternate path. And he came this way, making what's known as a battery. 2 pieces that move the same way in conjunction together. The queen moves diagonally. She's on the backside of this bishop. Again, if black plays a random move, the bishop will take the pawn, check. The bishop is attacking the king. The king has 2 legal moves. It doesn't matter where he goes. Sorry, checkmate. The bishop protects the queen attacks the king has no escape squares. Kids start learning about cooperation and harmony between the pieces, much like they would in music or acting. If you have people that are in a scene together that are not harmonizing, they're not blending, the guys see it. They see the attack and they block the attack by protecting it with the queen. And there's a little complication here that I won't go into in the game. Let's just leave it at this, that the queen came here and protected the pawn. That's good, but there's a problem. What do you notice about this bishop? It cannot move. What do you notice about this rook? It can only move to 1 square. So you have a 5-point piece and a 3-point piece that can do pretty much nothing. I would ask the students, okay, I'm telling you the piece that Morphy is bringing into the game. He's going to move the knight on b1. Based on what you know so far, where would you put the knight? You have 3 choices, a3, c3, or d2. Shrikant, where would you put the knight?
I was thinking of taking the pawn with my queen.
That was the, well, that was the move I didn't want to go into. If you take, no, no, actually, I'm glad because you were one of the players here. The reason these characters, the Duke and Count Isiord, put their queen on this square was in case you take the pawn, which happens to be a very good move, Shrikant, kudos to you. They would have played this move, queen to b4 check, which would have forced you to trade queens with me because the queen on b4 is simultaneously hitting your king and your queen. So if you block the check, you're going to lose your queen. So if I played that against you, you would have no choice but to take my queen. They would take back with their bishop. That move can be blocked. and Morphy would win this game in his sleep. But this does introduce a very high-level concept in chess in what happens when one of these pawns disappear. That line that we just went through, Shrikant, do you see that there's a hole here? What happens? If there's a hole there, it's like a set of teeth with a hole missing in the middle. And Shrikant, if you don't mind for the rest of the game, because I know that you play, would you mind if I went one-on-one with you?
Sure, sure.
Yeah. I apologize to everybody and thank you so much for attending. It would be a little hard to get everybody involved, but we'll have time after. So excellent observation, Shrikant. So Morphy blocks the check. So where would you put this knight based on your chess knowledge or something you've learned tonight? You have, again, 3 options.
C3.
And what is your reason?
Because it is protecting the pawn that is being attacked by the other knight.
Very good. And you also notice that your knight is attacking.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah, and it also goes, it is controlling the center.
There you go. The characters that you're playing against now. So Shrikant, congratulations. I've just morphed you into Morphy. So they realize now that this is a threat, that your queen might take it. So they defend the pawn by moving their c-pawn. And you'll notice, such a cool game, because this queen can move horizontally, the black queen on e7 is defending this pawn laterally. And it's white's turn. Morphy develops the bishop on c1, which again, it can only move diagonally, but it has 5 options. Shrikant, can you take the 2 moves on that diagonal that are flat out bad?
F4 and H6.
Excellent. If you put the bishop on either one of those squares, a pawn will take you diagonally and you will lose 3 points for 1. Not even 1, you'll just lose the bishop for nothing. So that takes us again to the idea of candidacy. Candidate moves. I want to bring this bishop in the game. I have 3 candidate moves. Out of the 3, Shrikant, which one do you like the least and why?
I like D2 the least because it's going to it blocks, it blocks the knight is blocking that, and it also stops me from developing my rook, which is sitting at A1.
Perfect. Perfect. If you get the rook to D1, the rook would love to work on this open file. Excellent analysis. So now you're down to 2. You're either going to put your bishop on E3 or G5, and they're both good moves. This, again, is a test for a 2nd, 3rd, or 4th grader in terms of their temperament, but it also works with adults. Where do you want to put the bishop? Or where do you think Morphy put the bishop?
Morphy would probably, he's an aggressive player, so he will probably put it outside.
To G5.
Yeah, to G5.
That's what he did.
Mm-hmm.
And he did it because he's putting pressure on the knight. And in case this knight moves, he'll take the black queen. If you had put the bishop on E3, you played a very good move because you improved the scope of the bishop. Like Monopoly, you now own all that property. But he played the most aggressive move, and now comes the pawn move B5. Now, I'm going to show you a sequence of moves that initially mess the kids up, because this is a position where 3 equals 2, and they don't get that at first. Remember, we said that the pawns are worth 1 unit of value, and the knights and bishops are worth 3. So what happened in this position was Morphy sacrificed his knight. They took the knight, and Morphy took back with the bishop. So you can't see what's off the board, but you gave away a knight that was worth 3 points and only got back 2, which introduces the concept of compensation. What did I get for what I gave? I gave my opponent 1 point of value. What did I get in return?
Sure. I think this is a fantastic position. It has opened up, you're attacking the king, so he has to respond. So that
Correct.
limits what he can do in the next move. Secondly, it allows us to bring up the rook to d1. Rook controlling an entire file, especially the central file, is gold. And you have both the queen and the bishop out there. That's a really, really powerful position to be in.
Perfect. In his mind, it was worth every bit of that pawn or point that he gave away. They have a problem. They need to save the king. If you put the queen to block, you'll lose your most powerful piece. If you block with this knight, that bishop will take your queen. The only move he had available was this. And now, Shrikant, you know how to castle. If you secure the king, you can castle on this side of the board, or you can castle on this side of the board. Which way did he castle and why?
Again, for an aggressive player, he would castle on the left-hand side. Correct. So that in the single move, he can get the rook out.
There you go. We've taught this concept of having a contest making lemonade. Bear with me. You tell the kids, I'm giving you a stack of lemons each. You get one squeeze of the lemon. When it's your turn, then your partner goes. Whoever fills the glass up first wins the game. When it's your turn, squeeze the hell out of that lemon. That's exactly what you just did. When you castled your king, you secured him because he's hiding behind these pawns. He might be vulnerable on this diagonal, but not anytime soon because you control it. And none of the black pieces are in position to attack. So with one move, he secures his king. If he would have castled the other way, yeah, he'd be very secure, but the rook is not fighting. So we have a concept in chess called time, like tempos in music. Don't waste it. He castles. And now, because of the amount of pressure on this knight, he decides to protect it with the rook.
Can I say just one thing? I love the game. So, I mean, just in the beginning, at this stage, I love the game because the position that Morphy has is so open. Yep. He has both the bishops out. He has the queen out. He has the rook out. This is amazing.
Perfect. Which if this were a live discussion with players, you start talking about nominal and relative value. This bishop here on f8 has the same nominal value of the bishop on g5. They're technically both worth 3 points. But in this position, the function of this bishop is 0. It cannot move. It's protecting things that are not being attacked. This bishop is pinning this knight to black's most powerful piece. So the utility that you get from having the bishop here is tremendous, tremendous. And now Morphy, for him, he had such a brilliant mind, he makes another sacrifice here. Wow. By giving away the 5-point piece for the knight. And if you were animating this like a play for children, you would make the trade and you would tell them that everybody on the Duke's side is laughing at the rook because the rook is foolish. He doesn't understand math. You just gave away 5 and only got back 3. But the rook says very politely, remember, we're talking to kids now. Okay, if what I did, I don't mind you guys having a good laugh. I'm laughing too. But if what I did is so bad, please tell me which one of you is going to take me. May I remind you that your king cannot do it, because if the king takes the rook, he'll be in check with the bishop. That's illegal. If you decide to take me with your queen, you're going to lose your most powerful piece. If you decide to take me with this knight, again, you're going to lose your most powerful piece. So it looks like it's the rook, and the rook takes. But you'll notice that when he kind of forces the rook up, the rook walks right into a pin. The rook cannot move. under any circumstance. Oh, I'm sorry. Under any circumstance can that rook move. So we have the following position. Teaching a first grade class, I'm standing in front and I say, in this position, the king, this one, writes a letter to his 4 remaining power pieces, not the pawns, the big pieces. And it says, dear power piece, it's come to my attention that one of you is not participating in the game. Please make your presence known. Be a little dramatic with the kids. And then I go in order. The bishop reads the letter, dear power piece, it's come to, the bishop calls the king. Your Majesty, I don't know what you're talking about. I've been pinning this knight forever. Look at my counterpart. Look what I'm doing for our team. King says, rip up the letter. Naturally, the other bishop on the light square says the same thing. Your Majesty, this is a 5-point piece that I'm stopping from moving. I think I'm helping the team a lot. The queen says to the king, I know you're not talking about me, right? Now who's left? And all the hands go up because all the kids know that it's the rook. And if I'm animating for a young group of kids, I'm going to be the rook and I'm going to pick up the phone and sound like I'm sleeping. Hello? The king's going, did you get the letter? Yeah, it's like, dear power piece, but your Majesty, I'm doing something really important. What are you doing? I'm guarding the H pawn. What? Yeah, one time my dad checkmated me on that square. It's never going to happen again. Now you laugh. There are kids who think that way. And the king says, please do me a favor. Do something more active. Should I guard the G pawn? Don't be silly. And the rook comes here and sees the counterpart at the top of the board and scurries back to the corner. Why? Because he doesn't want to get captured. He doesn't want his first move into the game to be a capture. And the king reminds him that rook cannot move. It's pinned. The rook cannot capture you because if it tries to capture you, the bishop will be checking the king. The rook relaxes, and then you hear a big shout, and it's the black queen. Enough. Loud in the classroom, loud, very dramatic, a shout. Enough. I can't stand this anymore. I have this bishop breathing down my back. I have my king stuck in the middle of the board, breathing down my back. This queen getting all the credit. I'm going to challenge her face to face. I'm going to let my bishop out. Then I'm going to castle my king. And I'm going to checkmate Morphy for giving away all these points. Let's trade. I understand the reason why. If I back it up, you can see her misery. Breathing down her back. Look at this poor thing. Look at this poor thing. Compare this rook in the corner to this one on D1. So the trade is on, but Morphy is not up for that. First, he makes a little trade and takes the rook check. If you take with the queen, the rook down here will take the queen. The king cannot take the bishop because he will be stepping into danger with the rook. There's only one choice, and it's the knight who is now free to move. Because once you move the queen from that square, this bishop is no longer pinning the knight. So the knight takes the bishop, which leads to one of the most famous moves in chess history. Putting this on as a play, I would start animating this rook. And you can see the computer is showing you all the legal moves. And I would lift the rook up in front of these kids. First tell the king, hey, Your Majesty, watch this. And I jump the rook up the board and hop over the knight and land on that square, which is totally illegal because the rook can't jump. But if the rook could jump and it could land on that square, the game would be over. It would be checkmate. Do you see, Shrikant, why the king cannot take the rook?
Yes, because the bishop is supporting it.
There it is. So then the older kids, the middle school kids, we lean into them and say, by the way, this is how they design iPhones. I know the rook can't go there, but if you want to design an iPhone, don't tell me what you can't do. Just design it in your head and then go backwards. Shrikant, If the rook is on d8, you win the game.
Yes.
What's stopping you from putting the rook on d8?
The knight.
Good luck. And I'm wondering how many of the letter D's that were in the chat earlier, they're like, I know this game, I know this move.
All right. So let's see. Does anybody want to make?
If you can open up the chat, if anybody knows the move.
Okay. Does anybody want? I'm going to give chance for people to put stuff in chat at this point. If you know this game, please don't spoil it. But if you don't know the game, you're welcome to guess. Okay, I think I know the answer, Arthur. I'm going to allow people to unmute if they want to. Is it all right, Mike? If
sure,
people, okay, Arthur, go ahead.
Okay, so we want to get the knight off of where it is. So we want to convince our opponent to move the knight somewhere else. So we need to give them a good incentive to move that knight, right? What is the incentive to get them to move the knight? Probably take the queen, right? So we could put our queen on b6, except then they take it with the pawn. So how about we put our queen on b8, which incidentally also puts him in check. So he's got to do something.
Excellent, Arthur. Excellent. Excellent. I love the fact that you threw this move in first, because this is a move that we get so much from the young kids. You put the queen a knight's hop away. This knight can technically take the queen, and then you can fly up the board and deliver the checkmate. This game is over. The rook is attacking the king, and the king cannot take the rook because of the bishop, and he cannot step down. So Arthur is 100% correct. You put the queen here, black doesn't have to do anything. Matter of fact, I could take your queen with my pawn or with my own queen. But what he found is the correct move. What Morphy basically said to these guys was, hey, nice playing with you. Good luck dealing with that crowd of angry actors. I have a parting gift for you. Check. Sorry. How do you escape the queen? The king cannot move. Anywhere he goes, he's still under attack. You cannot block this attack. The only move is to take the queen with the knight. Now, for all of you, I take the rook, brilliant move. He just gives the queen away and forces her away and checkmates the king. But with my group of first graders, I take the rook and I put it back on h1 to guard the h-pawn, and I let the black king live a longer life. But yeah, that is the conclusion. Very good, Arthur. That is the conclusion of perhaps the most taught game in chess. And it was an offhanded game, but that is the conclusion, Shrikant.
Wow. Wow. I love this game. It's so, I mean, it's so simple, so beautiful, so quickly he's able to just open up the board, get the full power of all his pieces, and it's just brilliant. So what I want to do now, it is about 10:30. So I want to open it up for questions, and you're welcome to, folks, you're welcome to bring up any question that you want. You can ask any question. If you let's actually collect all the questions, and then we will go ahead. I'll organize all the questions. So, folks, everything is fair game. You can ask about chess. You can ask about chess education. You can ask about how kids learn. Anything that you want. Go ahead and type exclamation mark in chat or raise your hand in Zoom in order to ask questions. We'll collect all the questions, and then Mike is going to answer all of them at once. There's going to be one answer to all the questions, all put together. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, folks. Jeff, what's your question? Jeff.
So I'd like to hear your thoughts, Mike, regarding how you can train or support the development of players to think 3, 4, 5 moves down the road?
Beautiful, beautiful question. That's heart of of teaching chess. Thank you. Next up is Lloyd. Folks, go ahead and line up for asking questions. Lloyd, what's your question?
Sure, I can ask a serious chess question. That's okay?
Sure, of course.
That's fine.
I can answer it.
All right. Now, Morphy had a lot of sacrifices in this game, 3. And so in terms of sacrifices, is a concept to better spot sacrifices with pieces, not a pawn, to imagine when you take back, what pieces will you fork?
Okay.
Okay. Excellent. Next question is from Joe. Joe, what's your question?
So when you're playing a superior player, do you play the player or do you play the game?
Okay, excellent. Superior player. How do you place a superior player? All right. Any more questions? You can keep asking questions. Okay. Now, there aren't that many questions, which I'm surprised by. I have about 20 questions, but your questions take priority. So we're going to go one by one. Let's start with Jeff's question, which is the heart of it. How do you teach kids to think multiple steps ahead?
All chess players have to be trained in calculation. So one of the best ways to do that is to take a puzzle that has a concrete answer that they know. For example, checkmate. You can have a book that is, the whole book is about checkmate, but it might be 2, 3, or 4 moves away. So the very first step is to give them something where they know there's a concrete answer and a concrete path to get from A to B, but it's not clear. So what they have to do is visualize the steps, and they get there. They eventually get there by just practicing over and over and over calculation, if that helps. It can be trained. It's something you can work on.
Wonderful. Let's take Joe's question first and then Lloyd's question. Folks, go ahead and just type exclamation mark. We're going to take questions as they come at this point. So when you're playing a player, let me make it more general. When you're playing a player, are you playing for that particular, you're looking at the person and playing, or how do you decide how to play when you're playing especially a superior opponent?
The higher you go, so playing at the expert level, if I'm playing somebody superior who's a master or an international master, there's nothing that I can do to, even psychologically, to take them out of their game, because they're so well-rounded and they're so strong, it's not going to happen. At the very top, at the very, very top, the players will work on opening theory, and they'll play things to try to trick the other player. And then lower, sometimes coaches can, and this is something that bothered me as a coach, where you can prepare your student psychologically against an opponent, a kid against another kid. So for example, if I happen to know that player X is very uncomfortable when they get into time pressure with a clock, then sometimes what will happen is you will have your student play something unorthodox on purpose to get that other kid to spend time thinking because it's new on the board. What happens is you may be playing something that is slightly inferior, but over the board, when you're hit with it for the first time, it's very, very hard to decipher that. The other problem with chess is it isn't a closed system. It's not like poker. It's perfect information. So you can try to play the player, but very often you just have to play the board and the pieces that are in front of you.
Wonderful. Next question is from Lloyd about sacrifice. What do you think?
Yeah, so Lloyd, that what to leave on the board after you sacrifice something, that again is all calculation. So if I can concretely see in my mind, I take your knight, you have no choice but to take back with a pawn. Then I give up my queen for your pawn. You have no choice but to take back with your rook. What'll happen is if I can see the end of that sequence concretely, then I'm going to do what I think is very, very clear. So the question, I understand the question, it's hard to answer without seeing a concrete position. Where your question gets interesting is if I sacrifice something, but it's not clear that I have enough compensation. So I gave you something that's worth 5 points and I only got back 3, but there's a lot more game to play. So I'm kind of taking a risk that the position that's left on the board is playable, if that helps.
Wonderful. Thank you. So folks, I'm going to start with my questions. Feel free to type exclamation mark to ask your questions. Your questions take priority. Mike, I was really fascinated with Morphy's playing style. What's the difference between an aggressive player versus a defensive player? And do you find that kids are naturally aggressive and defensive? And if that is so, how do you train one? How do you train one? Do you try to show them the advantages of the other approach? How do you approach that?
Yeah, that's probably the first step. Is if you had somebody who plays very tight and solid, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with doing that. We would show them a lot of Morphy games because his games are filled with sacrifices, but his games are also very sound. He always has all the pieces out. There's also the chat that you have with players that are not aggressive. There's a personality there that you have to be very careful with. You can't force them to be aggressive. What normally happens, Shrikant, is if they play enough tournaments, the game itself will force you out of your comfort zones. For any of the chess players that are here that are very technical and at a high level, there's an opening called the Caro-Kann, which at the beginning has many sequences that tend to be very passive, but very solid for black. And white to beat black has to have a long maneuvering game and try to outplay that way. But white has responses to the Caro-Kann that are very aggressive that will open the game. So even though you start your game in one style, your opponent can sometimes force you out. So what happens if the kids stay involved in chess? It works itself out. If that helps.
So another thing about kind of chess education. So you have, we're talking about the beginning stages. You're teaching them to kind of get going. What happens at more and more advanced levels? What kind of things are you teaching them? Now you teach kids who are really, really good.
Yep.
So how do you, when a kid is already at a very high level, what are you doing with them?
What I do is I stop them at the middle. So and when you meet Rusa, you'll see the same, that what we did is we took kids to the middle and kind of used a little, almost like a sieve, and pointed them in the right directions, because to play at a very, very high level requires a lot of, sacrifice for a kid, much like it would be for a musician. You're going to be putting hours and hours and hours into chess. So what we do is there are signs that show up very early in a player's development. In the game that I showed tonight, there were a lot of concrete moves, right? They're like, if I do this, your choice is limited. But what happens in most games is there's a lot of leeway. So when we analyze our students' games, we start to find holes in their analysis, and there are patterns that develop that are consistent. For example, you have a student that is constantly avoiding conflict. You see them not taking risks. If that's the case, then we can start, again, showing them the games. And then a very important step in this is who is the next coach? There's a psychological aspect to the kid's next step in the journey. And that is so familiar with musicians, with actors. When and I know Maxine could talk forever about this. If you were training a young actor who is really progressing and they get to the next stage, the next acting coach or the next person to pick that actor up, it has to be a very careful choice. I would imagine in music, it's the same. So that happens in our world a lot, because by the way, if you remember in Waitskin's book, when he shifted coaches,
yes,
he initially found a coach who wanted to change who he was. It tore him apart. So what I do is I get them to a point. Now, what I can share with you is I have run into some of the most strongest players on the planet when they were kids, namely two. One is Fabiano Caruana, who was a world championship contender, who I played in New York. Hikaru Nakamura, who grew up here in White Plains, who's broke into the top 10, and Irina Krush on the women's side, who was a grandmaster. I was playing against Irina when she was 10. And there's also a grandmaster here by the name of Nico Cheka, who I did have in one of my classes. Nico only stayed for one session. Nico came in at 7 or 8, and he immediately blew through our lower levels of classes. So this is really answering your question.
Mm-hmm.
And his dad wanted him to come to our 4 o'clock class, which had older kids, and I wouldn't let Nico come. He was probably stronger than all the players in the class, but I couldn't let him in the class because I would curse in the class. These were high school kids and older kids. We would curse, we would make off-color remarks because we're also trying to put calluses on these kids. They're competitive. So I don't want an 8-year-old necessarily hearing that. So Nico left. But what happened one time, Ruth and I used to play a simultaneous where we would play every student in the room, but we would alternate moves. So I would follow her. And it was hard for me because she's a much better player and a real attacker. And we would play in tandem. And one time I went in front of Nico and I made a move that was really bad. And he looked at me instantly as if he's 8 years old. And he just kind of gives me one of these looks. And when Rusa went around and saw the move that I had played, she turned and looked at me and was like, what the hell did you just do? But the look that he gave me is something that's very common with talented kids. Mm-hmm. Players like Irina Krush, she was 10. She's a grandmaster today. But we knew at 10 she was going to be a grandmaster. Fabiano Caruana used to come for our local tournaments. And at kindergarten, I believe, he came up in kindergarten and won the championship section in a local thing. You see it in the eye. What to do with those kids? When they come to me, I know I cannot hold them. They have to be, the tough job for me is psychologically, who is the kid ready for in the next step?
Wow. Wow, that was a wonderful, wonderful answer. Thank you. Next up is going to be Yen, Ambika, and Maxine. I'm going to give preference to people who have not asked the questions before, and then we'll go to people who have asked the questions. Yen, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering the skills that you learn from playing chess over and over again is that what transfers, what are the strengths that transfer into the real world skills and what are weaknesses in that kind of thinking?
Excellent question. So I'll give it to you from the young person perspective. So say after 6 to 8 years of playing chess competitively, for example, what transfers? What a competitive chess player is doing is they are playing with a clock within a time constraint. They are playing against someone who has the same information that you do, and the game becomes incredibly complex. Very often during that complexity, there is a chance for one of the players to break the equilibrium, to make a move that sets the game on fire. You have to deal with that sudden chaos, which you think is orderly is now chaotic. You have to deal with it in real time. So you are pulling out information, you're breaking it down, you're creating a plan, and you're also thinking about how your opponent can counter that plan. You're writing your moves in a notebook. The moves are taken home and they're analyzed as deeply as you would analyze, as we did last week, a piece of sheet music, a score, an acting script with deep analysis. And then you would make sure that you understand the lessons learned. If you wash, rinse, and repeat that cycle over and over and over again, by the time that kid gets out of high school, you have what I would call a real critical thinker. So the whole real premise of tonight is, can that skill be transferred somewhere else? I'm giving you a kid that is resilient because they're going to lose a lot. They're going to get their butts kicked, but they're going to come back. They can break down complex information, analyze it in real time, make a decision that has consequences, and deal with the result. and they're gonna run that cycle through, keeping in mind that chess can be very concrete and also beautifully artistic. So they're not these cold calculators. They actually have a pretty well-rounded view of their world on the chessboard. I hope that.
I want to ask.
Yes.
I want,
Can I follow up though?
Please.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned it's concrete, but isn't it just like in a closed system though? In other words, the skill is he's memorizing patterns and counters.
Yes.
But how does that transfer to an open system though in the real world then? I mean, is that a weakness?
It doesn't, and that's a very good question. The problem is that information is not perfect to humans, because to them, the computer will instantly tell you, yes, you missed something that was A, B, C, you could have done this. But for the player, we're not able to decipher that. So the skill that's transferred is the ability to kind of really think on your feet too, which is very, very important. The problem with transfer is the actual material. It's very hard to transfer chess, the actual technical moves of the game anywhere else but on the chessboard. So I don't know if that helps at all.
I'm thinking the critical thinking though is in the open system is different than the critical thinking that I hear in chess that I'm seeing right now. That is closed. It's closed. It's a closed system. It's predictable and it's limited by the board, by the information that you have. Whereas an open system, it can be trillions of permutations of
it is the same in chess for the human. It's incalculable. I can refer you to something called Shannon's number, which is the number of permutations on the chessboard, and they compare it to the number of atoms in the universe. It's astronomical. But just in the human sense, there is no human on the planet that can calculate anywhere close to the possibilities on the board. It's incalculable. That's why the computers just crush grandmasters routinely now. If that helps, and I definitely
let me go ahead and respond. Let's not do too many back and forths because there are lots of people in line. So I want to say a couple of things. It is a closed system, but the number of permutations, number of possibilities is so large that actual experience of playing chess is as if you were dealing with an open system, because the possibilities for our own calculation purposes is far greater than what we can actually put your mind around. I mean, the core thing that I see is transferable is that it is a simulation. It is a simulation of enormously complex problem played in a competitive setting with an opponent who has a character, who has a mind, who has a style. So I think, and you're doing the simulation in relatively small amount of time. So for me, it's mostly a simulator. Because of its complexity, it deals with a very large thing. So, but it's very useful simulator, which allows you to grapple with something much more than what you would do with a normal game because of its complexity. I think the only game I know which is kind of at the same order, I think, which I don't know very well, is Go, which also seems to be quite complex. But that's what I would say.
Can I just add one very quick thing? That when I was doing the set positions before, when they're static and they're not moving, it's a very good way to get students involved into picking out more and more information from something that's not moving and be able to verbalize it. Because remember, it's coming out of a school too. It's not just the actual playing chess. Is it a good tool in the school system if I put something complex on the board, much like I would hang a painting in an art class and say, analyze, tell me what you see in this painting. It's the same thing looking at the chessboard, and getting them to verbalize it is very helpful.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Ambika, followed by Maxine. Ambika.
So my question, Mike, is can you use this game to ascertain or gauge what line of studies students can take? Because we have counselors telling them what to do based on what they think they want to do, what kind of job they want, rather than all of this other stuff that is so important. And because you work with younger kids, you already get them to do all of that. But
Right.
ones who are jumping straight from the kind of high schools we have. So can you use this game as admissions, what do you want to do in your life?
Yeah, the
they-
younger they are, obviously, it's hard to steer them into some other direction, but or concrete direction when they're young. But what happens is the conversations that we have during the chess class, for example, you remember when we were talking about putting, just naming the squares, just having the student, it's a very simple algebraic grid, right? And we put the squares on the board and we just have the students tell me, where is this piece? And at first, at the beginning, Ambika, it seems very easy and some of the kids might even get bored. But then you can, if they're older, you can start talking to them about what an air traffic controller does, the importance of relaying simple information accurately. My friend Fred, I actually had another friend here. I don't know if Fred is, yeah, Fred is here. Is an ophthalmologist and a surgeon, and my dearest student is here tonight. And I've often used him when I'm talking to the students. I'll talk about accuracy. If you're a surgeon and you're in real time performing surgery, you have to be accurate. But if you have this conversation with a young kid and tell them, look, I don't care how much time you spend, I want you to give me the correct answer because it can be counted. Take your time and try to be correct. And I've had conversations with kids that they say, wow, that's really cool. I think that might be, but I haven't, I can't say that anything they learned about chess when they were young would be that I can prove today. That's why they did it.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Maxine, Laura, Jeff, Lloyd, and Joe. Maxine.
When my grandson was 3 years old, I taught him chess. Okay, and then he went into school and in kindergarten. Okay, he went in when he was 4. Now, they had a chess club. You couldn't join until 3rd grade. So I went to the head of the school and I said, well, he's playing chess. I want him in the chess club. And of course, you have to donate something so that they do something. So we did. So they put him in the chess club, but the older kids would not play with him, even though he was better than they were. So how do you deal with that? It was very discouraging for him because he was able to beat them, but they wouldn't play with him. Yeah. So socially, how do you deal with it?
That's a great question, because when my old partner Rusa joins me here, we'll talk a lot about the differences between age, gender. Where else does for example, seventh grade boy run across a 3rd grade girl in a competitive area? That's very uncomfortable to do. I've lost to some of my students if they've progressed. I've lost to 8, 9. Nakamura beat me when he was 8 or 9 years old. I know exactly what you're talking about. That's very hard to do. But so in an after-school program, they usually want them in the same grade. The answer to that question is they should have a program for the K1 kids. And if your grandkid is playing so much better than the other kids, as long as he can behave with the older kids, because that's one of the real issues we have in the after school program. The kid can play chess, but if the kid is not behaving, so what I've done with that is I just meet the parent. I'll say, I'll take a younger kid, but I want to meet the kid first. And just say, if the kid understands how to, there's a difference between a 1st grader and a 4th grader sometimes, but that's what I would do, Wonderful. But it happens a lot. We've had boys, middle school boys that absolutely melt in tournament games. They sit across from a 7th grade girl and they're sitting facing each other. We had a girl, her name was Michelle, in Greenwich, Connecticut. She used to get intimidated over the board. And the boys would like, oh, I'm going to crush you. It happens all the time. Like the boys are just, oh, I'm going to play. There's a big gap. We can discuss the reasons why in another meetup, but I would have her lean in and just say, are you reading the tattoo that's on my forehead? And the boy had no idea why she did. We've had kids learn Russian accents from Greenwich, Connecticut, doing Russian accents, coming in, say, it's nice to meet you. We'll play a game of chess. It's very nice to meet you. Now, why would we do that? Because you're sitting down, if you go back 20 years ago, all the greatest play, there was such a great immigration of tremendously strong Eastern European players. So you have some 9-year-old kid going, yes, I learned a little bit of Karpov games, but my rating is not so high, but I can play a little bit. It works. It works.
Wonderful. Next up is Laura, followed by Jeff. Laura.
I'm sorry, I don't know if I can stop laughing. That's the funniest thing I've ever heard.
You have to laugh in, Laura, you have to laugh in Russian accent.
Yeah.
Okay, I can do. Great. My question really, and I think somewhat answered a little bit. Do you ever follow these kids as they get older to see how much they've internalized things that they learned when they were young? So you're actually seeing the value of what you, okay, good, because I think you really appreciate that. You ought to keep a portfolio on these kids. Also from the fact of looking at, unfortunately, we still have classrooms K1, 2, all that, and there's no mobility. But toward that argument that kids should be working at the level that they are, are at, and not being forced to stay at the 3rd grade level when they're 7th grade level and work harder at socialization issues in classrooms, So, okay, that's good. One other thing, I had 2 things. But I guess I laughed away that time. So I know Shrikant won't give me any more time. So I'm going to go back to laughing at that.
Yeah.
I think that was brilliant.
Yeah.
I will, was it Yen that asked the transferable question? I forgot.
Yes.
Even Yen, but it connects kind of to what Laura said, because also emotionally and socially, there is a big transfer that, again, as a chess player, I don't know, 850, I don't know how many tournaments I've played. I've played people all over the world. And I can honestly say that if I'm in front of a group of people or another chess player, I could, where you're from or what, it's completely meaningless. I think that's one really benefit of young people playing chess is they get to hook up with people they're never going to cross paths with. A great dynamic, for example, and I'm sorry, my other friend here has left, was coaching school in the Bronx, and he was teaching with kids who had next to nothing. And at the same time, a lot of us here in Westchester were teaching in private schools up here in Greenwich, Connecticut, or in Scarsdale, New York, very affluent places, but we're also simultaneously teaching in places where kids have nothing. We would go to a national tournament together, and you would see these teams compete against each other, yet they're on even par. You have one side, they're flying to the tournament on a private jet, and they have money for private coaching. You have the other kids who have next to nothing, but spend a lot of time playing chess, yet they're playing at the same level. And there's reasons for that. There's reasons because the players with more affluence have access to more, but the players on the other side know how to fight. They know how to hold positions that are not easy to hold. Without resilience, you can't play chess. You learn to be resilient and resourceful. So you get kids with nothing against kids with everything. They're kids, right? They're kids. But yet over the board, it just all disappears.
That's a great point, Mike. I mean, I think this is again a tremendous value that chess can bring, that kids can just exercise their mind and do well.
Yeah,
and it really doesn't matter what grade you're in. You go ahead and you do your best, and you should be able to go as far. I mean, you see these 8-year-olds that can beat most other people, and that's wonderful. Right. And what that does is that whatever skill that they build there, whatever confidence that they build there, whatever ways of thinking, whatever, that actually helps them. Now, it could be somebody from Bronx. It could be a little kid from Bronx who has nothing, but is just motivated to really work at it. And they can go really far. It doesn't need anything else.
No.
So I think it's a very powerful upside for kind of human potential. Okay, next one. Laura, did you have a question?
I just wanted to say, I mean, I guess we've all seen these movies, you know, where these kids do math Olympics and stuff, and they're poor kids. And I think that there's so many of these stories that have gone on across the country. And I think we really should work harder to develop more of these children in these under, you know, served areas, because I think there are so many talented kids and they do have the fight. And, you know, chess is cheap. I mean, you don't need to have anything fancy to play chess. And I think we could be providing that as something for kids to do. I think it's a wonderful thing that you're doing, but you need to do it more. You need more of you, Mike, out there. So you ought to find more of you. You ought to cultivate.
He's Laura. He's only Mike A. There are Mike B's, Mike C's, Mike D's, Mike E's, and so on.
Yeah, my friend, he had his book out, wrote a book about the history of chess. He's not here anymore. He's going to be mad that I didn't. I wanted to introduce him. He's actually taught in PS 271. I forgot the name. He took kids from the Bronx in 2 national championships, and those kids are the best to teach, man. Because I go in there and they'd let me have it too. You know, just setting up a chessboard. I just got right to the instruction, and they ate it up. It was yeah. It's a shame he left.
Wonderful. Next up is going to be Jeff, Maritza, Lloyd, and Joe. Jeff.
Great job, Mike. Really appreciated it. Fantastic to benefit from your experience and reflections. Back to my initial question about helping humans think into the future. We do this a lot in leadership development. We give people cases and situations. And what we ask them to do is not only to consider a variety of, and we put them in teams, usually of about 3. And we ask them to consider various approaches and do kind of positives and negatives of those approaches regarding the future, which is really what you're trying to deliberate there, you know, when in that moment of when it's your turn. And the interesting thing is, after doing that for a while, and then having teams report out what approach they decided on, the most creative and powerful way to do it was to make teams have to tell a story about what was going to happen and what others were thinking and what they would do. And maybe even, you know, it might even involve several different people, you know, doing things in response to what various folks do. And cultivating that ability to think into the future and tell a story forward turned out to be a pretty challenging thing for folks. They can tell a story about the past, and they can even kind of put together a story regarding whatever they see in the present. But telling stories forward is a major skill in strategic thinking, and really in various forms of leadership. And that's a little bit of what I hear you focusing on here. People being able to tell the story forward as they guess the other player might play it out, even if it's tricking them. You know, what are you putting into that? What do you think they'll do? Telling that story forward is the way to think several moves ahead. And I wonder what you think about it. That it's sort of a relationship.
You kind of see it coming at some point, Jeff. So I'm sure at your level, like I've sat in with your meetups, and so you already have the ability. If you had a group of 6 to 8 people, and you were steering us in a direction, and there are signs from the conversation that you're going to say, oh, I see it coming. I know where this is going to go. It happens in chess as well on the board. The problem is you do get warning signs when a piece lines up with another piece. So, or for example, if an opponent makes a move and it just looks too simple, it just looks too simple with it. The players have to go, you have to be on guard. The more experience that you have, you learn when to take a timeout and go deeper and say, what's really here? What's behind the scenes? What could come? But it's not superficial. What happens to a lot of kids, and this connects to the other meetup we did about internet, either addiction or thought fragmentation, is the amount of time kids spending. Much, I'm sure, in your world, if you ask me a question and I answer you within 30 seconds and boom, out comes my answer. I don't know that there's not enough depth there, you know? So that story that you're telling down the line in chess, you have to see the warning signs. That's why you see the players like this. You see them in this kind of position because the warning signs are there, but if it's really important, you've got to dig deep to make sure that it's there. I don't know that I can exactly connect it, but I think we're on the same track.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Maritza, Lloyd, and Joe. Maritza.
So you've been talking about teaching children, and first of all, it's fascinating. But a question I had was, you know, some of the things you were just speaking about actually with Laura or Jeff bring to mind the idea of like transformational coping. And so I was just wondering, are there instances of people using chess or the learning of chess to aid adults in improvement in some areas? Like, are there like maybe people who have mental issues that they're trying to overcome, or I don't know, emotional, or I'm just curious if you know of any programs that are specifically using chess for such a thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of local groups that have, here where I live, they have senior days, for example, where you get a lot of high school kids that will come in and volunteer time for seniors to play chess. You'll see people going into nursing homes just to keep the mental acuity up. I can't name one, like a very specific one, but we do it individually. So I have a lot of students who don't play competitively, some of whom are adults. And one of the reasons they want to study chess with me is for exactly what you just said. They have some issue where they're either finding solace in chess, where they like to go over games and tell the story with me, or they're feeling I had a physician, not my friend Fred here, but I did have a physician who was complaining of having some issues concentrating and found that chess helped her really put the focus back on her work. So yeah, I think it can do a lot, but I'd like to go a little further. There's a problem with adults learning something new. We all feel that sometimes. Like, why not learn to play chess? Then the excuses will start. Sometimes I'm too old. I wasn't good at math, for example. I think the key in the coaching is to connect the game to your life first, and then proceed to teach the game through the person that you know. I don't know, you and I have never met, for example, but I know that are you trilingual, Maritza, or more, or 4 languages? Okay, so because I got to know you a little bit and I've heard you present here so much, I kind of have an idea already what you're capable of doing. The fact that you can speak 4 languages means your brain is wired for chunking. So if you and I sat at the chessboard, your brain just takes all these individual sounds in different languages and chunks them, and you're fluent in those languages. If I got you to talk about what you see on the chessboard, just verbalize it, you'd be amazed at how fast you could talk about what it is that you see. It's my opinion. This is anecdotal, but that's what I would do with anybody that I met who wanted to learn chess. Get to know the person, learn their skill set, and then put the game through the skill set.
Wonderful. Lloyd and Joe, thank you for being patient. Lloyd, what's your question?
Sure, just 2 points. Does chess, when you have maybe a player who's not as good as another, does chess reward aggressive play and aggressive thinking because it forces the other person to kind of think more about defense and not so much about offense?
Lloyd, do you play poker?
Not too much, no.
Okay. It's a very similar dynamic. If there are any poker players here, that timed aggression is rewarded in poker as much as it is in chess. And the reason for that is most humans that I know don't like to be attacked and they don't like to be put to the task. So in poker, if I'm an aggressive poker player and I time my bet in a way that I'm putting pressure on you, and it also, because remember, we're human. So the second that you put pressure on another human, does it affect my cognitive ability? We could all answer that individually. How do you handle pressure? Right? So that's a very good question because the answer is absolutely yes, but it's timed aggression. There are chess players that attack too fast, and that comes out of the art of war where they're lost before the game begins because all they're going to look to do is play the most aggressive move they can. And there are poker players who lose in the long run the same exact way. It's timed aggression. I haven't met a human yet that really enjoys being attacked. So if that helps answer the question, timed aggression is rewarded in chess.
Thank you. Next up is Joe, followed by Marco. Joe.
You've kind of captured the answer to my question. It was basically the personality of the individual. Does it come out on the chessboard? In other words, is it so the way if they're an aggressive person in general, that if you, let's just say you have an investment banker or something like that that's coming in there, is it going to come out on the chessboard? What does that look like? And I guess it's a way of reflecting on yourself in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. The vast majority of the time, if I walk into a fourth grade classroom, I can tell, like, again, when I said as a joke, I can tell who the wise guys are already. There's an excellent chance that the younger they are, it's more often the boys that are more aggressive at first. The girls, and I hate to generalize, this has just been my experience, the girls tended to listen very carefully to the lecture. So if you remember the game that we went through, Joe, most of the girls would bring the pieces out into position, get all their pieces ready, and then leave them there. The boys would bring one piece, not all the boys. The aggressive boy will bring one piece out and take that piece and try to kill you with it. And once you take that piece from them, they bring the next piece out and try to kill you with that piece. But in general, yeah, the aggression, the personality does come out. But there are cases where it's opposite. There is a grandmaster named, there are several grandmasters who were very quiet, Alexander Lenderman, really nice guy from Brooklyn, I believe, originally. He's just a kind of smallish guy, very quiet, very polite, very mild-mannered. He is a fierce, or can be a fierce attacking player. When you meet Rusa, when she comes to present with us one of these days, she's a great study to watch physically play chess, as other players are. Yeah, she can be aggressive in her real life. She's got a very warm heart, but she was raised to be a competitive chess player. When she sits at the board and she's losing, you see her shoulders cramp. They're like this. And when she's winning, she's ready to pounce like a cat. A lot of chess players exhibit this, where you see the shoulders widen, the elbows are on the table, and there's a little hop because they are ready to pounce. You can physically see that, which is pretty cool. You know, it's not fun is when you're getting that look from an 8-year-old. When I'm the adult who's getting squeezed and there's the 8-year-old that can't wait to, to come after you. Yeah, the personalities come out. Mine come out. My games are a big mishmash because I have so many voices in my head. My games are all over the place. Depends who shows up that day to play.
Wonderful. Marco, you're next.
I was just wondering if there's any essential books or maybe a website to learn a little bit further to get started on.
Yeah, you can. There's some holes in this. I would go to chess.com to start, Marco. And if you go to chess.com, you can get a free account. And they have lessons at the beginning where you can move the pieces on the board like I did here, and then just play some games, and then get I would say next, maybe even go to YouTube. Like, don't spend any money. That would be my first bit of advice, just to make sure that you really get into the game. But a website like chess.com has a lot of videos and tutorials. And then even on YouTube, if you just typed in learning chess to start, that's a pretty good way to go. And if you do, just get in touch with me here through 52. Like, if you feel like you're really into it. But any advice I can give is just don't spend any money early. Just learn the moves of the game and try to play your own games online.
Okay, Mike, I've been holding out my questions, so I have to tell you some stories.
Love it.
About me and chess, and then ask you some questions.
Yeah.
So one of I learned chess very early. My dad taught me, and I was very big fan of chess right from very early. And I had a friend, and his dad bought him a computer. And this is like, at that time, computers were almost impossible to get in India. Okay. So, and we were very good friends. So we said, okay, we need to do something with the computer. Okay, what shall we do? I think I was in my maybe 8th grade or so. Didn't know anything about computers. So he said, this was his idea. He says, look, you know chess. I don't know chess. So you teach me chess. And as you're teaching me, we will write down what you're teaching me, and we are going to we'll program the computer to play chess. We didn't realize that chess is not the first program you write when you're trying to learn how to program a computer.
Wow.
So that was my experiment. So chess helped me get started on programming of computers by trying to write the.
Nice.
Of course, it was it was just complete failure, but that's a good thing, trying out many things. So, and one thing I learned from my friend, who's he's a brilliant guy, was that he said, look, because I was very systematically playing chess, I'd learned all the openings and say, he says, no, let's try to play. Let me try this move. Let's see what happens. So the idea of playing many games fast, so that you can learn, instead of trying to say, okay, look, this is a serious game, so let me just play it through. The sheer quantity of games that you run through is, I found it critical. It just enabled me to learn faster. What do you think about that?
I think you're onto something that musicians will do too, where you will actually, so take the example of a musician that's learning technically only from the very beginning, learning their scales, learning all the stepping stones to becoming a classically trained musician. But what you and your friend did is what a lot of musicians do, is we're just going to get together and jam. And at the same time, though, in between our jam sessions, I'm going to be listening to a lot of music. And I want to listen to different genres. I want to listen to different time signatures. I want to listen to it all. And then we get together and we're just going to jam again. We're just going to sit and throw the ideas at each other, right? The same thing happens in chess by going over lots of games. So the year that Rusa won she won the US championship in 2005. Prior to her winning the US championship, she was training by doing very technical studies, endgame studies, to work on her calculation. But then she was also going through series after series of grandmaster games, different styles. One primarily, which was the different of her. She's an attacking player. She was going over Smyslov games, which were more positional, but constant flow of games. I think that's a pretty reasonable.
Absolutely. I certainly think I love to do it. I do the same thing with music. Yeah. And I did the same thing. I'm very nostalgic about chess, because in 1 year I played chess, and I played a lot. I mean, I read books continuously. I was reading many games. I was playing with many people. I was just continuously kind of immersed in that. And what happens is that see what happens, like this is something, and I want to invite people who have played chess a lot to comment. Okay, so now type if you have played chess a lot. I want to hear about your experience of playing chess, so that people who are not used to chess get some flavor of it. Because what the point I want to make is that something like chess, just like any other activity, has levels. There is this initial learning period where you're kind of getting the blocks in place, you're kind of getting the basic level. And as you progress, a lot of that gets internalized and it's just kind of flowing, and your conscious focus keeps shifting to more and more complex and higher level things. And the learning is kind of becomes far more complex, where you're saying, you know what, that I am unnecessarily defensive, or I am a little bit too foolhardy. I like the fact that I'm aggressive, but I tend to be, and you kind of are working at things at that level. So that's something that I find really fascinating, of kind of, because you're really working at very high complex level stuff. So can you talk a little bit about that experience as you grow up as a player?
Yeah, it was weird for me, Shrikant, because I didn't grow up playing chess. My father taught me when I was young. He didn't even know the real rules. So the complexity for me, like the real delving in, came much, much, much later. I told you I was a member of the American Stock Exchange, and we would play there. It's important that I give you the background before I get into the complexity. And I was a floor broker, and we got slow. We started to play chess, and a grandmaster was an option trader there, said to me one day, stop by the Manhattan Chess Club. And what? It was in Carnegie Hall at the time. This little rickety elevator took you to this anteroom, and I learned to play chess there. But what made me kind of seek the complexity was I saw people from all over the place, many in suits that were there on lunch breaks. Then you see the bohemian types sitting there. You knew they were playing chess for a living, but they were all fascinated, right? So what's the catch? For me, it was like, what is this about? So when I started to study the game for the sake of seeking knowledge, it almost becomes like an obsession, because the minute you go, it's the onion theory, right? It's like you talk about that. The minute you peel it away, it's like, oh, I've got it. And you realize you don't have anything. You're actually now at the bottom of the next level. And you work your way to the top and you peel it. It's like, oh my God. It can be a little obsessive. And there's a little danger as you seek the deepness of the complexities. It's a wide sea. And I've had issues with that. You got to be a little careful with the complexity part. But the beauty of it is when you start to understand it at some level. I don't know if my friend Fred is still here or not, but Fred.
Just let's check. Give me a second.
Yeah, Fred.
Fred, are you there? Give me a second. Yeah, Fred is there. Hi, Fred.
I don't know if he can.
Frederick Wang.
Yeah, Mr. Wang. Well,
okay.
I was going to say, so Fred is an amateur player, and Fred is 73. But he said to me, he goes, well, I had one goal in life, and it was in chess, and it was to begin to understand grandmaster games, and he can, So it's the seeking of that. Now, I can't understand them like a grandmaster can understand them, but it's like us listening to music. The deeper you go, the more you hear in the same piece,
Okay, another thing I want to pick up is how chess works in very young kids and how it works in very old people. Okay. Because like I think it's an amazing way of remaining young for older people, because it is complex enough that's going to challenge you. So even if you're learning it for the first time, or if you've played in the past, just playing is going to do wonders, I think, for your mind. On the young level, the thing is that, that young people are very good at language, picking up language, because they're able to form new patterns fast. And that also is a indicate with the fact that there are these prodigies. That's an indication of it, because they're building up connections the brain itself is growing. It is making new neural connections. And if you get the chess in there, it's like learning a language. Learning a language at 2, 3, 4 is a lot easier, like orders of magnitude easier than learning it at 8, 9, 10. So any thoughts about that?
Absolutely. That's why I mentioned to Maritza before, the fact that she speaks 4 languages fluently. Again, the wiring is there, right, Shrikant? The wiring, if you're speaking 4 languages, it's there. The same in music. I learned to play drums at 11, and I was very, very serious for a while. So I was even learning classically. Today, I mean, I wouldn't play with a band today, but if I picked up a pair of drumsticks, I can still make them sing, so to speak, but I would not call myself a drummer anymore. The reason that I can still make them sing is because drumming is language-based, and I learned drumming young. Why is it language-based? I'm taking a single stroke roll, now a double, and then a paradiddle, and I'm just combining these patterns the same way a chess player combines individual moves, the same way a mathematician manipulates the number line. To me, and this is where I would really like, because I'm stepping out of any form of expertise, this is all just theory of mine. I think it's language-based. Like you said, I think it's the manipulation of these individual units, whether they be sounds in an alphabet, whether they be notes on the staff or numbers on the number line. To me, the younger you are, the more you're able to manipulate those individual units and chunk them. That's what I feel. I would love to hear from somebody here who has some expertise in that area.
Yes. So folks, anybody who has played chess, if you want to talk about your experience playing chess, let's see. Lloyd, go ahead.
Yeah, just to get folks interested, one of the funnest parts of chess has been for me picking an opening. In other words, when you have white and when you get to go first, I've experimented over, some time with different openings, and I found the best. First of all, you don't change openings all the time. You stick with one opening for a while to learn some of the variations of that opening. But what's really interesting is that I used to play the Queen's Gambit, but everybody knows the Queen's Gambit and how to process the Queen's Gambit. But now I'm playing an opening where they don't understand the position that I end up in as well, and it's much more effective. So there are certain positions where your opening will leave you where there's a lot more to process than simply the Queen's Gambit, which everybody knows how to defend. I was not doing well with that, but when I found another opening, which I will not reveal, the position I end up with is much harder to process. There are a lot of errors you can go into in trying to attack me. So the position is harder to assess for my opponents. So it was a lot of fun finding an opening that had results.
Yeah.
Nice.
So folks, that's a great point. I did the same thing as a kid. I kind of studied all the openings, found an opening which was relatively obscure. And the great thing is that chess has a lot of data. So you can really study the opening and you can see all the possibilities in which it can go, and you start playing it and the other person is completely lost because they have to rethink everything and you've already seen all the possibilities. It's a great way of playing. Next up is Yan. Yan, what's your experience playing chess?
Okay, I'd like to share some of my experiences playing chess in the real world, and then transition and ask Mike to see compare observations from his students. Okay, and on the dark side here, I can say is that in the real world, I seem to see people who have learned chess play some principles of it, such as trying to checkmate someone. Okay, and how it translates to in the real world is that they try to place you in a situation that you cannot win. No matter what decisions you make, it is a downside. Okay, the way out of that though is that in the open system, you're usually able to. the people are not able to control all of the real life factors to be able to actually put you in a box like they want you to. Okay. So that is a chess move or an attitude or a result that they're pursuing, but I not see it, fortunately, I don't see it as always effective. However, institutions with playbooks, with repeated processes that they implement, they try to do this. They try to have a playbook to put people in boxes or, in other words, control the situation. It doesn't always work in an open system. Now,
Thank you. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'll say, in other words, the students also, do they kind of transition and get that kind of attitude and understanding? Is before I turn over a mic, I'll say is that one of the things in putting people in boxes, though, one of the results of the dark side of that is that you then force that person or teach that victim to learn helplessness. That's one. And you also see the extreme examples of that is that when you apply this to people, some people commit suicide because they think they have no way out, or they believe they have no way out. And that could be maybe a chess mindset as well, knowing that you've been checkmated, or the interpretation subjectively by that victim as being that. Okay.
Thank you.
Now, that's the dark side. Let me turn over the mic. This is what I observed as students learning chess principles.
Yeah, the dark side, I've had students that have had some pretty serious internet addictions, and chess was an outlet for it. But I've seen just as many with Minecraft or YouTube, addiction to YouTube or TikTok or any other addiction that comes through. So I can't necessarily, there is a dark side to playing chess if you let yourself get absorbed in that way, but I'm not sure that it's the game that causes it. Yeah, again, because there are so many outlets. I have seen the dark side and lived through it. I've had some students that have had some really rough times, and chess happened to be part of their addiction. My feeling is, getting to know those students, they would have had that addiction pop up in another area. It would have popped up in a video game or somewhere else. But yeah, I can see the possibility.
Thank you. All right. So, Mike, I mean, there's just so much to talk about chess.
Thank you all for hanging
I
in.
have to tell you something. As a kid, I love chess, and I had some friends who were also very big chess. So what we had is we had prepared a small, almost palm-sized chessboard, because in school I couldn't play chess. I'm supposed to be studying. So we had a palm-sized chessboard with, it's a cardboard chessboard with pieces with little pictures on it made out of cardboard, which we could carry in our pocket. So we could play it during recess or when the teacher was not looking. So and the thing is that what happens is that after a while, all of that becomes, you are able to play in the head. So you can, you can kind of play with each other. You can use that as just a takeoff point. So you have it going. So it's so you're bringing back so many fond memories.
Great. Shrikant, can I ask a favor?
Sure.
Joe, did you happen to take any word notes?
Yeah, I did.
Because
I mean, there were a lot, just as far as compensation, convergence, tumbling, centralization, perspective, efficiency, I guess would be one. Even purpose is a word, one of those words that you would actually on adjacent, resilience, relative value, fair trade, nominal values. I have scope, concrete, efficiency, and closed system as well. And castling as well.
No, thank you, because I asked Joe to just take some notes along the way, because it's what we ended up doing in front of boards sometimes, is we would have people sit in on the lessons, or we would talk amongst each other about what it is that we're actually teaching the kids. Like what are the words that are coming out of our mouths? Is the vocabulary above grade level, and can they actually understand the concept? So Very helpful, Joe. That's exactly what we would have done if.
So the ones that Maritza has are compensation, cooperation, harmony, and convergence.
Awesome. Yeah.
The ones that I had in the beginning, somewhere, give me just a second. I'm trying to find them in the chat. They were the center has scope, purpose, nominal value, fair trade, relative value, and convergence. Wonderful.
Thank you, Maritza.
Right.
And candidate. Thank you, Ambika. Yeah, candidate. Which is an interesting concept, the idea of candidacy in a position when you have more than one good option. And when you see these kids sometimes sitting like this, they are trying to calculate concrete moves, but other times, you remember, Shrikant, when you had to choose which square to put Morphy's bishop on, and I asked you to find the one that you liked the least, and then the other two were both really reasonable. Well, which one do you choose in a real game? That's hard. That's a candidate move. And what is a candidate move? It's a move that is designed to solve the problem that's in front of you. A non-candidate does not solve the problem that you have in front of you. I think it's kind of cool when you get a middle school kid that understands how to divide options into candidates and non-candidates, you know? I always found that to be very helpful.
Wonderful. So folks, I want to tell you now about the biggest project that we are doing in this, in our meetups. What we're doing is, see, I'm a big fan of history. And when you look at the history in a bird's eye view, there are three large civilizations. There are many other civilizations, but there are three large civilizations. There is the West, there is China, and there is India. It's about 1 billion people each, and which have got very rich and different histories. We started this with Tao Te Ching, and Tao Te Ching has been doing amazingly well. It's really, I mean, it's just what we managed to do with Tao Te Ching, I was very, very impressed by. So I said, we need to do the same thing for the Bible. And I'm telling you that the Bible meetups that we are doing, we've chosen Gospel of John, and that is doing extremely well. It is different from Tao Te Ching. The greatness of Tao Te Ching is that it is bringing you something that you're not familiar with that can transform your life. What the Bible meetups are doing is that it is giving you a deeper understanding of something that is integral part of this culture. And you're getting so many views. I'm telling you, it's going to go to the next level on Thursday, because I have some people who are really, really deep students of Bible showing up. Plus, one of my favorite philosophers and my absolute favorite theologian, Thomas Aquinas, I just found out that he has done commentary on John, which is one of the most influential commentaries. So I'm going to take 3 sentences, okay, just 3 sentences, and I'm going to talk about his commentary on those 3 sentences. And that's going to take, I mean, I strongly recommend that. It's cost only $5 on Kindle, but it really, it's a great as a reference work. So I want to just show you what that mind was like and what can be done with text. It's not about the Bible. It is understanding what words are and how to think about this kind of material. So that's the second one. And we are about to start the third one this Friday, and that is going to be Bhagavad Gita. For me personally, this is the most challenging one because I'm in a very odd context. I grew up in the Indian culture. I grew up in a literary family, so I was very, very familiar with it. I can read Sanskrit. I spent 3 years studying Sanskrit. I can read Bhagavad Gita in original. I can read about 90% of it. And I have got a fantastic Marathi translation. And Marathi is a language I grew up speaking. I know it better than English. And because Marathi is derived from Sanskrit, reading the Marathi translation, whatever words I'm missing in Sanskrit, I'm actually seeing a form of the same word in Marathi. So my understanding, I'm able to patch up my understanding of Sanskrit. And that's what I'm reading. In addition to that, I was talking to Yasuhiko, and he pointed out the value of sound. Okay, so that is something that you have to really experience in order to get. Just like the Chinese civilization is heavily visual, Tao Te Ching is full of images. It communicates using metaphors. India uses a lot of sound in order to transmit its culture. That's a very deep part of the Indian culture. So we're going to be exploring that. So what we are really doing is exploring the Western mind, Chinese mind, and Indian mind, seeing the similarities between them, differences between them. We're going to do that in a very patient way. We're going to look at it. I really don't know how to approach Bhagavad Gita. We're just going to go slowly. The first chapter that we are studying on Friday just sets the stage. It just describes the story. It describes the problem. There is a big war. It describes the beginning of the war as the two armies get ready for it. And the primary warrior, the most important warrior from the good side, looks at the opposing army, which is actually his own relatives, his own teachers, his own friends. And he's saying, nothing is worth destroying, nothing is worth killing these people. So he drops his arms and turns to his friend, Krishna, who is God. But he's a God as man, is incarnated as man. And he asks him for advice. So Gita is Krishna talking about this. The other thing I'm going to do, which is very different from the way in which Bhagavad Gita is studied, is that at the end of each of the sessions, I'm going to pick a song about Krishna, because the concept of God as incarnate in real life, who's doing exactly the same thing as everybody else does, this integration of spiritual and real that India has in the character of Krishna is really unique. And it's essential to grasp that. The notion of God is very different than that of the West. So I want to bring that up using songs about Krishna. So we're going to be talking, the song that I picked this time for the first one is the teenage exploits of Krishna, whereas how it describes how he chases after girls when they go to fetch water. So that's going to be the song at the end, because that is going to give it is going to allow us to place Gita in the entire context of the Indian mind. I also want to I want to explore this point about sound. Initially, we'll be studying the Gita on its own. We're going to look at it ourselves. I have recommended, there is a great translation by Sri Aurobindo. I have picked Aurobindo because he's one of the most profound thinkers. He's regarded as definitely in the top 5 or top 10 thinkers on Indian philosophy in the 20th century. So, and he's trying to understand, not trying to do literal translation, but trying to get at the meaning of it. So I think he's going to be a good guide, but feel free to use any translation. The good news is that Bhagavad Gita is very short. It's about 35 pages. That's it. Divided into 18 chapters, 2 pages each. That's it. You can listen to the whole thing in less than 2 hours. Just like Dao De Jing, you can listen to it in about 2 hours. It's about the same length, I would say. I don't know whether about the same. It's comparable basically in length to Dao De Jing. So it's a very small amount of text, but very deep. But we are going to try to explore it. And I want to do this as a conversation. See, what we are trying to do is we're trying to develop a new medium of accessing written work, making the written work come alive. Doesn't matter what your background is. We're going to have people there who have never heard of Gita, who have never looked at the Indian culture, are not familiar at all with it. Lots of people like that. We're also going to have people who have studied it for a long time. We're doing it in a way, I'm trying to do it in a way which is very different. Because the advantage that we have is both an insider that I have is that I'm both an insider and outsider. I'm an insider in the sense I grew up with it. It's part of my being. At the same time, I've been away from it for 30 years. I'm not religious. So it's very different kind of a perspective than most people who study Gita. So I'm going to use both the outside perspective and the inside perspective and try to understand it in the context of what it has to offer to us. I mean, the core thing that we are trying to do. So why are we studying these 3 things? What I'm trying to do, and this is something that I think is the crucial intellectual challenge of our times, is that we're trying to understand the East and the West. So and I think of East and West as mostly West, China, and India, because China and India are actually very different from each other. So the question that we're trying to answer is, what can West learn from India and China to make us better? What can China learn from West and India? What can India learn from West and China? My brief answer to that is that actually a lot. I think West, for example, we've already seen in Dao De Jing, the Chinese ability of thinking about health, proper dynamic relationship between factors to make healthy operation possible, that way of thinking, this yin-yang balance, trying to find the right path, that kind of thinking in China is very advanced. And we can definitely learn a lot from it. India has focused on consciousness for a very long time. So for example, meditation comes from India, and that's just the beginning. Awareness of the inside is something that India can bring. Also the integration. So there are many, many things. So this is just like a Cliff's Note version of it. But the only way to get the full picture is to understand each of these things on their own terms. So I invite you to join us. It doesn't matter what you know, how much you know, whether you know a lot or less, doesn't matter. Even if you know a lot, please have the beginner's mind to understand it from scratch. And don't be afraid if you don't know anything. And let's learn together. Let's ask. I find that, everybody who actually is Chinese and is going through Dao De Jing keeps telling us that they are getting more from their reading of Dao De Jing with our group because of the questions that are being raised, but the questions that never occurred to them because they took many of those things for granted. Okay, so that's what we are going to do. So I hope to see you tomorrow for welcoming Thomas Aquinas into the conversation. It's going to be, we are going to spend a lot of time. We did chapter 2. I was hoping to finish chapter 1. I was originally, my meetup description said we'll be covering 3 chapters per meetup. For the first chapter, it took us 3 meetups. The second chapter, we are able to go through only everything except last 3 sentences. But I'm going to get Thomas Aquinas involved on those 3 last sentences. I think it is 23 to 25 sentences, just those 3 sentences. And then we are going to go to chapter 3. And then I look forward to having you join us for the start of Bhagavad Gita on this Friday. All right, folks, thank you very much. And Mike, this was wonderful. This was just incredible.
Great fun by me.
Yeah. We should do more. I look forward to having your friend back, hopefully in December, the thing. And Maritza, you're going to do a meetup on December 1st, is that it?
Yes.
Can you tell a little bit about that meetup?
Sure. It's going to be on the danger of the one story. And the last name of the presenter is Aditya. The first name is very long and I don't wish to butcher it. Mm-hmm. But what I'm actually going to do is, so I'm asking folks to take the time to watch a 16-minute video, but if you don't watch it, it's not a big problem. But I intend to use as example for danger of the one story is I have a little anecdotal story there. And what we want to get into is the question of, we, all of us at some time or continually, we forget that a story that we're walking with may not be the only story. In fact, almost none of the stories that we walk with are singular. And so we're going to explore that aspect of shifting perspectives.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Marisa. So next one on Wednesday is going to be CJ, and he's finally going to be talking about Dante. I cannot understand CJ. He has put so much work in Dante, but he has not attended any of the Dante meetups. And he's been working at it for the entire year. He says he's been spending about 8 hours a week on Dante. Okay. And he is a very serious guy. And he's going to tell us what he has gotten in just one single meetup that's coming up next Wednesday. The Wednesday after that, Sanjay will be back on a topic on neuroscience. Then it's going to be Maritza. And then it's going to be Mike will be back. With hopefully his friend or some other meetup. So looking forward to that. See you folks soon. Good night, everybody. Bye.